Hello, my name's Matt, and today I'm preaching on Jesus calming the storm. So it's been a real privilege to look at this passage because it's one that we're probably all familiar with through if you've been Sunday school or you've heard of any sort of the main Bible stories. Jesus calming the storms is one of the ones that we're probably well versed in and well known about. And so to have the chance to go back and look at some of what the passage is telling us and what we're learning from it has been really quite a powerful experience for me. And so I looked back at the whole of Mark 4, which contains the sort of the 5 passages that refer to the situation of Jesus calming the storm. And then you look at the whole of Mark 4, you see that the day has sort of started with crowds gathering. Jesus is by now getting, I suppose, fame. He's well known. People would have been coming to hear him preach. They would have been coming to see if he was the Messiah. They probably heard about the miracles that he's been doing. They would have known that John the Baptist had anointed him, and he had been sort of preparing the way. And so the crowds are starting to gather, and Jesus is now at a point where he's sort of moving and the crowds are following him. And so they're at the edge of the shoreline, and the crowds are so great that they're now spread along the shore. And Jesus has to get into the boat to then start to preach to them. And so after quite a hot day of preaching, the sun coming down, they wouldn't have had a PA system. He would have been stood in a boat, a bit rockety, preaching to the crowds. The end of the day draws near. And it says that the disciples and Jesus went as he was. So he wouldn't have had a change of clothes. He wouldn't have sort of had a shower. They just sort of probably picked up the oars and started to row. And you hear about that some of the crowd follow him. They're so keen to keep in touch with Jesus and see where he's going and to hear more from him and to follow him around, that they start following him too. And so they start to go across the lake. And as they go across the lake, obviously the wind starts to whip up and the storm starts to brew, I suppose, and come to a point where they're fearful of their own lives. Now, the first point I want to make is that Jesus was asleep. So Jesus got a pillow and he lay down and fell asleep. He had a power nap. This is a really important point. If you're a Christian, it is good to have power naps. I like that. If you know me, I like to sleep. So therefore, I'm greatly encouraged by this passage that sleeping and power naps is clearly a good Christian principle for good Christian living. Point 1. Point 2 is that the disciples they're not naturally calm in this situation. They do have panic. They're quite anxious. The storm whips up. If they'd have been a fisherman for the amount of time, their careers are being fishermen, and so they would have had experience of storms and the damage that a storm could do. And so they are fearful of their lives, and they fly into like what we do when we get into a panic situation. We fly into trying to solve the situation ourselves. And so they get to the point where they've tried to probably, I guess, tackle the masts, tackle the sails. They're trying to row into the storm. They're trying all the stuff that their fisherman brains tell them, and get to the point where they're like, Jesus, don't you care that we're about to drown? And they wake Jesus up. And so Jesus wakes up and it says he rebukes the wind and the waves, and the waves are calm instantly. So through God's power, he's able to calm the storm. And the disciples sort of look at him, and it says they are in this passage it says they're shocked. They're who is this man? But in the other 2 accounts it says they are shocked and amazed, which it would be, wouldn't it? That has now moved their understanding of who Jesus is onto a level that he can even control the elements. Probably one of the things they were most fearful of as a fisherman was storms. Probably one of the most dangerous things that they faced in their lives. And here is the Son of God able to calm one of the most dangerous things in their life that they come across. So they'd seen him preach, they'd seen him do miracles. He'd healed paralytic, he'd healed Peter's mother-in-law by that stage, and he'd healed a couple of blind people. He'd done, it says in Matthew's gospel, it says he did many miracles. So he probably did more miracles than are accounted for in the early stages of the gospel. And yet here for the disciples, Jesus is standing up and calming the elements. He's got control over that through God's power. And so you see that this brilliant little interchange with Jesus and the disciples at this point. They're going, oh my word, that's quite, that's mind-blowing what you've just done. And then Jesus says, where is your faith? Do you still not have faith? So to a degree, I've always been challenged by that, because as a discipleship, as in, as Christians, we try to be disciples. In Matthew 28, it says, "Go make disciples of all nations, and my Holy Spirit will be with you to the end of the age." Matthew 28, the Great Commission. So we're called to be disciples. So I always put myself in this situation as a disciple. And I've often been challenged by this because I've thought, well, that's a bit unfair for Jesus to rebuke the disciples, because how were they at that stage to know that he had the power over wind and rain? And so I've always wrestled with it a little bit and thought, cool, I'd be a little bit upset if Jesus had told me off at that point. But one of the things to learn about, or to think about when you're looking at the New Testament and you're looking at the discipleship process, is the rabbinical nature of discipleship. So the disciples they were chosen by Jesus. So Jesus is a rabbi type figure for them. So the rabbi nature of relationship with disciples and rabbi is teacher and student learning. And so Jesus is giving them a crash course in how to be a disciple, because he knows he's got 3 years or so working with them to train them up to eventually lead the church. And so you've got this moment where he is teaching the disciples an important lesson. So do you still not have faith? So they're traveling with him. They're seeing what the things he's doing. He's teaching. They're learning the teachings, how he's able to apply the scriptures and God's word into the scriptures, and also the miracles that he's performing. And so here is the lesson for us and the lesson for the disciples. Where is our faith? When we go through troubled times, where do we turn to? Do we start getting onto the boat, we try wrestling with the rigging? Do we start wrestling with whatever the problem is, or do we turn to Jesus? And the answer is, of course, we probably pile in with the trying to sort it out ourselves. If you come to the Croxon household, there's two things on the wall. On one side, we've got the footprints poem, so the poem of the man walking on the shore, and he sees one set of footprints. And when he looks back and he sees the footprints, he says to the man on the shore, "Where were you when I most needed you?" And of course, it's Jesus. And Jesus says, "Yeah, when those single footprints were there was when I carried you." So that's one poster we have on the left. On the right-hand side is something that isn't Christian, but it means a lot to me. And it's, life isn't about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Now that poster leapt out to me in one of them curiosity novelty shop places on the Dorset coast somewhere, and I was going through a very rough time, work challenges, stress. I was close to some degree of mental breakdown, so we were on holiday, and Emma was saying, "You're here but you're not here." I was there on holiday, but my brain was elsewhere, and I was really, really going through a wrestling type moment. And I was doing what the disciples do. I was trying to solve the various problems that were going on. It was all work related, and I was on holiday, and I knew what I was going back to was going to be a really challenging set of events. And I was doing the discipleship thing. I was throwing the disciples thing. I was trying to figure out a way forward, and that life's not about avoiding the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Not a Christian thing. It's a secular thing. I'm sure it's in many, many shops. But what it meant to me, and it means to me now, is you can't avoid the storm. The storm is going to come. If you live 90 odd years, you are inevitably going to have some stormy periods in your life. And this was a stormy period in my life. But you can learn to dance in the rain. And why the two are on either side of our door is because you come in and you go out of our house. And if you understand the footprint significance in the light of the learning to dance in the rain, it suddenly helps you get through life. It's helped me get through life. When times are tough, I look to the right. I understand that I've got to dance in the rain. I can't avoid the storm. I've got to navigate my way through it. But if I focus on the right-hand side, that during those tough times is when Jesus carries me. That's when I've got through the times that have been toughest. In that particular example, I prayed and I just went, "Lord, I just can't get through this in my own strength." I tried for about 2 or 3 days. I've been wrestling with the solutions to this particular problem. And as Emma had said, I was there, but I wasn't there. My brain was all over the place. And from that moment onwards, I sort of laid it before and said, "Look, Jesus, I want you to carry me through." Like the footprints poem, I want to lay this challenge before you and you take me through it. When I got back to work the following week, there were countless situations where I was going into meetings thinking, man, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And words or situations would come from nowhere that just saw us through. It was me and the organisation to an extent, saw us through this tough time. Meetings where you went in thinking this outcome can only be negative, it's not going to be positive, and suddenly there were things that twisted and the positive outcomes came. And so I learned, and I dedicated my life to that point, and probably have done for a long time. But that was kind of the crucial thing in my journey of faith. Where is my faith? Do I try and sort it out myself, or do I turn to Jesus? And the lesson I learned, and I am still learning, and I guess we'll all learn, is that it's just quicker to turn to Jesus in the first place. As soon as you have a problem, it's tempting to try and do the disciple thing. Sort the rig in, row harder, get through the storm. But why don't you just turn to Jesus? Where is our faith? Just turn to Jesus in the first place. Pray. Just say, Lord, I'm going through a bit of a tough time here. Can you give me the words to say? The other thing is the wrestling with Jesus. One of the things that the rabbis taught, and as you went through the rabbi system, once you got to sort of 13, you went on to another level. The disciples never quite made it into the discipleship, into the rabbi school, the school where they go on to the next level, because they probably failed the exams or whatever and went off to be fishermen. But the system was to wrestle with the scriptures. And what Jesus was doing on the shore was teaching to people who already had an underpinning knowledge of the scriptures. And so he was then applying the knowledge, and they would have wrestled with it. It was kind of a traditional thing to wrestle with the scriptures, not disagree with them, just get them and apply them to real life. And so there are situations where we go, Lord, like the disciples, do you not care? And there will be situations in life where the answer doesn't come straight away. And you're tempted to go, Lord, don't you care about my situation? Don't you care about me as an individual? It's a very human reaction. There are times at 3 o'clock in the morning, probably between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, where I've laid awake. And what I've learned very late in life, probably late into my 30s, was that is a really good time to spend with Jesus. I've learned that through many, many hours of pacing, of panic attacks, of being wide awake and going, sweating, and Emma being rather cross that I've woken her up. Late on in my life, I learned that's a very good time to pray and say, Lord, I just can't deal with whatever's going on in my mind. I'd like you to calm my storm. I'd like you to come into my life. I'd like you to sort me through this situation. I'd like to dedicate this thing that I'm going through to you, and to trust that you will see me through in that time of need. And of course he does. As Emma, very wisely, my wife, very wisely says, Matt, how many times has it ever been as bad as you thought it's going to be? And she's absolutely right. Even in some of the most stormy times of my life, it's never been as bad as my brain says it's going to be. But in Jesus' strength, I've definitely seen miracles occur. I've come through situations that I couldn't see happening in a positive way. Things have happened by asking Jesus to help me through that I just could never believe would happen. And so this is the message from today, that we as Christians have that opportunity to trust in Jesus. When he says, where is your faith? Our faith isn't in our own actions. We can do as much as we can. We can try and fight the storm. The storm's going to happen. You are going to have a stormy period of your life at some point, and trusting that Jesus is in it with you is an amazing thing. That Footprints poem is the one I'm going to leave you with. Dig it out if you're not familiar with it. It's well known, but it is that image that you look along the shoreline, and as you look back and you look at the single set of footprints and you think, man, where were you when I most needed you? That's when Jesus is carrying you.